The clock tower chimed midnight as Emma stood in the shadows of Buckingham Palace's iron gates. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her tour group had left hours ago, but she had lingered behind, captivated by the majestic building that seemed to glow under the moonlight. At 23, this trip to London was supposed to help her forget the heartbreak she had left behind in Chicago. Her ex-boyfriend had shattered her trust and she had fled across the ocean hoping distance would heal the wounds. The streets were quiet now, with only the occasional taxi rumbling past. Emma pulled her coat tighter against the December cold, watching her breath form small clouds in the air. She had always been a dreamer, the kind of girl who believed in fairy tales even when life proved otherwise. Her mother used to tell her that she felt too deeply, loved too quickly. Maybe that was why it hurt so much when things fell apart. A movement caught her eye. One of the Queen's guards stood at his post, tall and imposing in his iconic red uniform and bearskin hat. Emma had seen the guards during her tour, admired their discipline and stillness. But this one was different. Even in the dim light, she could sense something beyond the rigid exterior. Perhaps it was the way he shifted his weight ever so slightly, or the barely perceptible turn of his head when a night bird called out. She found herself walking closer, drawn by curiosity she couldn't explain. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement, and though the guard gave no outward sign of noticing her, she felt certain he was aware of her presence. Emma stopped a respectful distance away, tilting her head to study the ornate details of the palace gates. Minutes passed in silence. Then unexpectedly the guard spoke. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but in the stillness of the night every word reached her clearly. "You shouldn't be out here alone this late. It's not safe." Emma's heart jumped. She had been told the guards never spoke while on duty. She glanced around to make sure he was addressing her. "I know," she replied softly. "I just couldn't bring myself to leave. It's so beautiful at night." "Beautiful things can be dangerous," he said, still not moving, still staring straight ahead as duty required. But there was something in his tone, a warmth that contradicted the coldness of his stance. "Are you speaking from experience?" Emma asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Perhaps it was the anonymity of darkness or the fact that she was thousands of miles from home that made her brave. A pause followed, long enough that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My shift ends in 10 minutes. There's a small park 2 blocks east. If you're still curious about beautiful and dangerous things, you could wait there." Before Emma could respond, he fell silent again, becoming once more the statue-like figure tourists photographed during the day. Her mind raced. This was crazy. She didn't know this man. She should return to her hotel, call it a night, be sensible. But when had being sensible ever led to the kind of stories worth telling? She walked toward the park, her practical side arguing with her adventurous spirit every step of the way. The small green space was empty except for a few benches and a fountain that had been turned off for winter. Emma sat down, pulling out her phone to check the time. She waited, half expecting him not to show up, half hoping he would. Exactly 10 minutes later, footsteps approached. The guard appeared, but he looked different now. He had removed his ceremonial hat, revealing dark hair slightly mussed from being confined. His face was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 28 or 29, with sharp features and gray eyes that seemed to hold secrets. He had draped his red coat over his arm and loosened his collar, looking more human and somehow more vulnerable. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I wasn't sure you'd show up either," Emma admitted. "I'm Emma, by the way." "James," he replied, moving closer. "And before you ask, yes, we're absolutely forbidden from fraternizing with tourists while in uniform." "I could lose my position for this. Then why did you risk it?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. James sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Because in 3 years of standing guard, nobody has ever looked at me the way you did tonight. Most people see the uniform, the tradition, the spectacle. You looked at me like you were trying to see the person underneath." Emma felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. "I recently got out of a relationship where I felt invisible," she confessed. "Maybe I've become good at looking for what's hidden." They talked for over an hour, 2 strangers sharing pieces of themselves in the safety of darkness. James told her about growing up in Yorkshire, about joining the army to escape a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. He spoke of the pride and burden of serving in such a visible role, of standing perfectly still while his mind wandered to places far from the palace gates. Emma shared her own story. The broken engagement, the job she had quit, the feeling that at 23 she was supposed to have her life figured out, but felt more lost than ever. James listened without judgment, without offering easy solutions, just present in a way that made her feel heard. "I have to go," James finally said, checking his watch. "I'm expected back at barracks. But Emma, would you consider meeting me tomorrow? I have the evening off." Emma hesitated. She was scheduled to fly home in 3 days. Getting involved even casually seemed unwise, but looking into James's hopeful eyes, she found herself nodding. They exchanged numbers, and as he stood to leave, something shifted in the air between them. James leaned down and Emma rose to meet him. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. It lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, Emma felt something she thought had died with her last relationship. Hope. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could exist outside of books. When they pulled apart, James smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Tomorrow, then," he whispered. Emma watched him walk away, disappearing into the London night. She touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of that midnight kiss. She had no idea what happened next, no plan for how this could possibly work, but for the first time in months, she felt alive. As she made her way back to her hotel, Emma didn't notice the figure watching from across the street, someone who had seen the kiss, someone who would soon make everything infinitely more complicated. The fairy tale was just beginning, but so were the challenges that would test whether their connection could survive the harsh light of reality. Emma barely slept that night. She lay in her small hotel room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss over and over in her mind. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped, hoping it was James. But he didn't text until morning, a simple message that made her smile. "Coffee at 3? There's a place near Westminster I think you'd like." She spent the day wandering through London, but for once the historic sights didn't capture her full attention. Her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. She changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a simple green sweater that her best friend had once said matched her eyes. At exactly 3 o'clock, she pushed open the door to the small cafe James had suggested. He was already there, sitting in a corner booth, wearing civilian clothes that made him look like any other young man in London. But when he saw her and stood up, that same intensity she had noticed the night before was still there. They ordered coffee and scones, and the conversation flowed easily, picking up where they had left off. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Emma said impulsively, warming her hands on her coffee cup. James considered the question seriously. "I write poetry," he admitted, looking almost embarrassed. "Terrible poetry, probably. But when I'm standing guard, unable to move or speak, my mind fills with words. I imagine entire verses about the people who walk by, the changing seasons, the weight of tradition." "That's not terrible," Emma said softly. "That's beautiful. Can you share one?" James glanced around as if checking that no one else was listening. Then in a low voice he recited, "She came like winter rain, unexpected and cold, but when she looked at me I saw spring waiting to unfold." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Did you write that about me?" "Last night when I got back to my room, I couldn't sleep." "I couldn't either," Emma confessed. "James, I have to tell you something. I'm only here for 2 more days. I fly back to Chicago on Friday." The light in James's eyes dimmed slightly. "I knew you were visiting. I suppose I hoped for more time." "Me too," Emma whispered. "This probably doesn't make any sense. We just met. But I feel something I haven't felt in so long. I feel like myself again." James reached across the table, taking her hand. His palms were calloused, the hands of someone who had held rifles and stood for hours in all weather. But his touch was gentle. 2 days can be enough to know something real when you feel it. The question is, what do we do about it? Before Emma could answer, a tall man in his 50s approached their table. He wore a military uniform with several medals pinned to his chest. His face was stern, and when he looked at James, disapproval radiated from him. "Lancaster," the man said sharply, "what do you think you're doing?" James immediately stood, his posture straightening into military attention. "Colonel Harrison, sir. I'm off duty, sir." "Off duty doesn't mean off the radar," Colonel Harrison replied. "I received a report this morning. You were seen breaking protocol last night, conversing with a civilian while on guard duty. Then you were observed engaging in inappropriate conduct with that same civilian. Emma's stomach dropped. Someone had reported them. That figure she had sensed watching in the darkness had been real. "Sir, I can explain," James began, but the colonel cut him off. "I don't want explanations, Lancaster. I want assurance that it won't happen again. You're one of our finest guardsmen. You have a spotless record. Don't throw away your career for some tourist romance." The word tourist hit Emma like a slap. That's all she was to this man. A distraction, something temporary and meaningless. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "Excuse me, sir," Emma said, standing up. Her voice shook slightly, but she pressed on. "With all respect, you don't know me. And what happened between James and me has nothing to do with his duty or his honor." Colonel Harrison turned his cold gaze on her. "Miss, this is military business. I suggest you finish your coffee and let Guardsman Lancaster return to his responsibilities." "It's fine, Emma," James said quietly, but she could hear the resignation in his voice. "The colonel is right. I have duties." "James, oh," Emma started, but he was already moving away from the table, following his superior officer out of the café. At the door he looked back once, and the regret in his eyes broke something inside her. Emma sat back down, her coffee gone cold. The other patrons had gone back to their conversations, but she felt exposed, foolish. Of course this couldn't work. She had been naive to think a midnight kiss could lead anywhere real. She was a tourist just passing through, and James had a life, a career, obligations that meant more than a fleeting connection with a stranger. She left money on the table and walked out into the gray London afternoon. It had started to drizzle, the kind of persistent rain that soaked through clothes slowly. Emma didn't care. She walked aimlessly through the streets, past Buckingham Palace where this had all started, past couples holding hands and tourists taking selfies, all of them living their lives while hers seemed to be falling apart again. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from James. "I'm sorry. Please let me explain tonight. 8 p.m., the bridge near your hotel, please." Emma stared at the message for a long time. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to spend her last 2 days in London seeing the sights alone, to go home and forget this ever happened. But Emma had spent so much of her life being smart, being cautious, protecting herself from hurt. And where had that gotten her? She texted back, "I'll be there." The hours until 8 o'clock moved slowly. Emma returned to her hotel, changed into dry clothes, and tried to read a book, but the words blurred together. At 7:30, she gave up and made her way to the bridge. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and reflective, mirroring the streetlights in pools of gold. James was already there, leaning against the bridge railing, looking out over the Thames. He wasn't in uniform now, just jeans and a heavy jacket, his hands shoved in his pockets. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, relief flooding his face. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't," Emma admitted, stopping a few feet away. "That was humiliating today, James, being dismissed like I was nothing." "You're not nothing," James said firmly. "Emma, you're the first thing that's felt real to me in years. Do you know what it's like to live your life on display, to be a symbol instead of a person? When I'm in that uniform, I represent something bigger than myself. I stand there and thousands of people look at me, but nobody sees me." "Nobody except you? Then why did you just leave?" Emma asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "You let him talk about me like I was some kind of problem to be dealt with." James ran a hand through his hair, frustration and anguish warring on his face. "Because he's right. I did break protocol. I could face disciplinary action. But Emma, I'd do it again. That's what terrifies me. I'd risk everything for you, and I barely know you." The confession hung in the air between them. Emma felt her anger soften, replaced by something more complicated. "So what do we do?" she asked, echoing his question from earlier. "I don't know," James said honestly. "But I know I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. I know that in one night you made me feel more alive than 3 years of standing guard ever did." Emma moved closer, closing the distance between them. "I leave in 2 days. You have a career you could lose. This is impossible." "Most good things are," James replied, and then he was kissing her again and Emma was kissing him back. And for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the colonel, not the distance, not the impossibility of it all. Just 2 people on a bridge in London, holding on to something fragile and precious and real. When they finally pulled apart, Emma rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she whispered. Now, James said, we make the most of 2 days, and then we figure out the rest. They walked together through the city, hands intertwined, talking about everything and nothing. They shared fish and chips from a street vendor, laughed at bad jokes, and watched street performers in Covent Garden. For those few hours, they weren't a guardsman and a tourist. They were just James and Emma, two people falling for each other against all odds. But even as Emma felt happiness bubble up inside her, a small voice in her head whispered warnings. 2 days wasn't enough time. Long distance was hard. His career came first. She was setting herself up for heartbreak. The voice sounded suspiciously like her ex-boyfriend, who had always told her she expected too much, hoped for too much, felt too much. Maybe she did. But maybe that wasn't something to fix. Maybe it was something to embrace. As midnight approached and they stood outside her hotel, James pulled her close. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, Emma agreed. Every moment until I have to leave. She watched him walk away, and this time she didn't feel sad. She felt determined. If this was going to end, at least it would end knowing they had tried, knowing they had been brave enough to reach for something real, even if they could only hold it for a little while. What Emma didn't know was that James had already made a decision, one that would change everything. And tomorrow would bring surprises neither of them expected. Emma woke to her phone ringing. Groggily, she reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. It was barely 6 a.m. James's name flashed on the display, and she answered immediately, her heart already racing. Emma, I need you to trust me, James said without preamble. His voice sounded rushed, urgent. Can you be ready in an hour? I'm taking you somewhere. James, what's going on? Emma asked, sitting up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I'll explain when I get there, please, just trust me. An hour later, Emma stood outside her hotel, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. She had dressed warmly, unsure of what James had planned. When his car pulled up, a modest sedan rather than anything military, she climbed in without hesitation. Good morning, James said, leaning over to kiss her cheek. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept, but there was also an energy about him, something almost reckless. We're going to Yorkshire. To where I grew up. Yorkshire? Emma repeated. James, that's hours away. Don't you have duty today? I called in sick, James said, pulling into traffic. First time in 3 years. They weren't happy about it, but technically I'm allowed personal days. Emma stared at him, trying to understand. You're risking more trouble with your superiors just to show me your hometown. James glanced at her, his gray eyes serious. After yesterday, after what the colonel said, I realized something. I've spent my entire adult life following rules, meeting expectations, being what everyone else needs me to be. And I've been good at it, but Emma, when I'm with you, I remember who I wanted to be before the army, before the uniform. I wanted to be someone who took chances, who lived instead of just existed. The drive north took them through changing landscapes. The urban sprawl of London gradually gave way to rolling countryside, green fields dotted with sheep, small villages with stone churches that had stood for centuries. They talked during the drive, but there were also comfortable silences, the kind that only happen when two people feel at ease with each other. Around noon, they stopped at a small pub for lunch. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other, where the bartender called out greetings to regulars by name. An elderly woman behind the bar brightened when she saw James. Jamie Lancaster, she exclaimed, coming around to embrace him. How long has it been, lad? 2 years? Something like that, Mrs. Pemberton, James said, hugging her back. I've been busy with duties in London. This is Emma. She's visiting from America. Mrs. Pemberton studied Emma with sharp but kind eyes. American, is she? Well, any friend of Jamie's is welcome here. What brings you to our little corner of the world? I asked her to come, James said simply. Wanted to show her where I'm from. Something passed across Mrs. Pemberton's face, a knowing look that made Emma wonder what she saw. They ordered steak and ale pie, and while they ate, James told her about growing up in this area. How he had worked at his father's garage, how he had wanted to leave so badly he could hardly stand it. But how now, being away, he missed the simplicity of it. My father died 5 years ago, James said quietly. Heart attack, quick. That's when I joined the army. Needed something structured. Something that made sense when everything else felt chaotic. The Queen's Guard gave me purpose. And now? Emma asked gently. Now I'm wondering if purpose and passion have to be the same thing, James admitted. For a long time I thought they did, but meeting you has made me question everything. After lunch they drove to a small cottage on the outskirts of town. It was quaint, with a thatched roof and a garden that looked overgrown but charming. James explained that his mother had moved to Spain after his father died, that she rented out the cottage now, but the current tenants were away for the month. They walked around the property, and James pointed out the tree he had climbed as a boy, the stream where he had caught his first fish, the shed where he had learned to fix engines with his father. Each memory he shared was like a gift, a piece of himself he was offering to her. "Why are you showing me all of this?" Emma finally asked as they sat on an old bench overlooking the stream. "James, I appreciate it, but it makes everything harder. I leave tomorrow. Building more memories just means more to miss." James turned to face her fully. "Because I need you to know that I'm serious about this. About you. Emma, I don't believe in love at first sight. I think that's a fairy tale people tell themselves. But I believe in recognition. I believe that sometimes you meet someone and your soul recognizes theirs, like you've been waiting for this person without even knowing it." Emma felt tears threatening. "That's beautiful. But recognition doesn't solve practical problems. You're here, I'm in Chicago. You have a career you could lose. What if I'm willing to lose it?" James said quietly. "What if I'm willing to take that risk?" "James, no," Emma said, shaking her head. "You can't throw away everything for someone you just met. That's not romantic, that's reckless. And what if we don't work out? What if this feeling we have doesn't survive distance and reality? You'd have given up your whole life for nothing." "It wouldn't be for nothing," James insisted. "Emma, even if this doesn't work out, even if we crash and burn spectacularly, at least I'll have tried. At least I'll know I was brave enough to reach for something I wanted instead of just accepting what was given to me." Emma stood up, pacing a few steps away. Her mind was racing. Part of her was thrilled by his declaration, by the idea that someone could feel this strongly about her. But another part, the part that had been hurt before, the part that had learned to be cautious, was terrified. "I can't let you do that," she said finally. "I can't be responsible for you upending your life. What if I'm not worth it?" James stood and came to her, taking her hands in his. "Emma, you told me about your ex-boyfriend, about how he made you feel like you were too much, like your feelings were a burden. That was his weakness, not yours. The fact that you feel deeply, that you care intensely, that's not a flaw. That's what makes you extraordinary." A sob escaped Emma's throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much damage her ex had done by constantly making her feel like her emotions were something to apologize for. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared of feeling this much this fast. I'm scared of hoping again." "I know," James said, pulling her into his arms. "I'm scared too. But let's be scared together. Let's at least try." They stood there for a long time holding each other while the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Emma made a decision in that moment. She would be brave. She would take the chance. Even if it meant getting hurt again, even if it meant complications and challenges, she would try. "Okay," she said, pulling back to look at him. "Okay, but James, you need to promise me something. Don't make any rash decisions about your career until we've had time to think this through. Don't quit anything or do anything irreversible. Let's take this one step at a time." James nodded, relief flooding his features. "One step at a time. I can do that." They drove back to London as darkness fell, the car's headlights cutting through the night. Emma felt different than she had that morning. Something had shifted. The fear was still there, but so was hope, stronger than it had been in a long time. When they reached her hotel, James walked her to the door. "Tomorrow is your last day," he said. "Your flight is at 7 in the evening, right?" "Right," Emma confirmed. "I should probably pack, get organized." "Or," James said, a smile tugging at his lips, "you could spend the day with me." "One more day. We can figure out the rest later." Emma laughed. "You're a bad influence, James Lancaster." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." They kissed goodnight, and Emma floated up to her room. She video-called her best friend Rachel back in Chicago. It was afternoon there, and Rachel answered on the second ring. How's London? Have you been crying? You look like you've been crying. Are you okay?" "I met someone," Emma blurted out. "Rachel, I know this sounds crazy, but I met someone and I think it might be real." Rachel's eyes widened. "Okay, spill. Tell me everything." Emma told her the whole story, from the midnight kiss to the confrontation with the colonel to the trip to Yorkshire. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expressions ranging from concerned to excited to worried. "Em," Rachel said when Emma finished, "I love that you're happy. I really do. But I have to ask, because I'm your best friend and it's my job to be the voice of reason, are you sure you're not just rebounding?" It hasn't been that long since David. The mention of her ex-boyfriend's name made Emma wince. "I thought about that," she admitted. "But Rachel, this feels completely different. David made me feel like I had to shrink myself to fit into his life. James makes me feel like I can expand, like there's room for all of me." "That's good," Rachel said carefully. "But honey, you leave tomorrow. What's the plan? Long distance? Is he going to visit? Are you going to move to London?" "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "We haven't figured that out yet. We're just taking it one step at a time." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I trust you, Em. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. Just promise me you'll be careful. Guard your heart a little bit even if it feels like you want to give it away completely." "I promise," Emma said. Love you too. And I want updates, like constant updates." After they hung up, Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. Tomorrow was her last day in London. Emma's last day in London began with an unexpected knock on her hotel room door. When she opened it, still in her pajamas, she found a hotel staff member holding an enormous bouquet of flowers in a sealed envelope. "Delivery for Miss Emma Collins," the young man said with a smile. "Lovely, aren't they?" Emma took the flowers, white roses mixed with lavender, and thanked him. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a card in James's handwriting. "Meet me at Tower Bridge at noon. Wear something comfortable. Trust me one more time." She looked at the clock. It was just past 9 in the morning. 3 hours to get ready. 3 hours to wonder what James had planned. Emma showered and dressed in jeans, a comfortable blouse, and the walking shoes she had been wearing all week. She packed her suitcase, trying to ignore the weight in her chest that came with preparing to leave. At 11:30, she took a taxi to Tower Bridge. The iconic structure rose before her, its Victorian Gothic towers reaching toward a cloudy sky. Tourists crowded the walkways, taking photos and admiring the Thames flowing below. Emma searched the crowds for James, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. Then she saw him. He stood near the entrance to the bridge's walkway, and he wasn't alone. Beside him was Colonel Harrison, the stern officer from the CAFO. Emma's stomach dropped. Had James gotten in even more trouble? Was this some kind of formal reprimand? But as she approached, she noticed something odd. Colonel Harrison was smiling. Not a warm smile exactly, but not the disapproving glare she had seen before either. It was more resigned, almost amused. "Emma," James said, taking her hands, "thank you for coming. There's someone I need you to meet properly. Colonel Harrison isn't just my superior officer. He's also my mother's brother." "My uncle." Emma's mouth fell open.
"Your uncle?"
"The very same," Colonel Harrison said, his voice gruff but not unkind.
"And before you ask, no. Jamie didn't tell me about you because he's a stubborn fool who thinks he can handle everything on his own."
"Just like his father." "I didn't want special treatment," James said defensively, "and I knew you'd try to talk me out of it." "Of course I'd try to talk you out of it," the colonel replied. "Boy meets girl. Boy throws away career for girl. Everyone ends up miserable when the romance fades. I've seen it 100 times. But Jamie's mother called me last night, gave me an earful about letting him make his own mistakes. Said I was being a hypocrite, since I did the same thing when I met my Sarah." Emma looked between them, trying to understand what was happening. "I'm sorry, I'm very confused. James, what is all this?" James took a deep breath. "Emma, I've spent the last 2 days thinking about what you said. About not making rash decisions. About taking things one step at a time. You were right. But I also realized that sometimes the first step needs to be a leap of faith." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a letter of resignation from the Queen's Guard. I wrote it last night, but I haven't submitted it yet, because I wanted to talk to you first to make sure you understood something important." Emma felt panic rising in her chest. "James, we talked about this. You can't quit your job for me." "I'm not," James said firmly. "I'm quitting for me. Emma, showing you Yorkshire yesterday reminded me of who I used to be, who I wanted to be. I became a guardsman because I needed structure after my father died, because I needed to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. And it served that purpose, but it's not my forever. I've been too afraid to admit that. Too afraid to disappoint people, to seem like I'm abandoning my duty. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. What my stubborn nephew is trying to say is that he's already been accepted into a civilian position. The Historical Royal Palaces organization needs security consultants. Less standing still, more actual security work. Better pay, normal hours, and most importantly, the flexibility to travel. To travel? Emma repeated, hope beginning to bloom in her chest. To Chicago, James clarified. Not permanently, not right away. But Emma, if we're going to do this, if we're going to try, we need to be in the same place sometimes. I can't ask you to move your whole life to London when we barely know each other. But I can come to you. We can take our time, figure out if this is real, if it can last. Tears streamed down Emma's face. You did all this in one night? I made phone calls, James admitted. Called in some favors. Uncle Harrison helped, even though he thought I was being reckless. The position was already open. They'd been trying to recruit me for months. I just kept saying no because change scared me. But you scare me more, Emma. The thought of letting you walk away, of wondering what could have been, that terrifies me more than any change ever could. Colonel Harrison shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm not good at the emotional speeches. That's Jamie's department, apparently. But Miss Collins, I was hard on you at the CAFO, because I've seen too many good soldiers throw away promising careers for temporary romances. What I didn't see then, what I understand now, is that my nephew wasn't throwing anything away. He was making a choice to live his life instead of just serving his duty. I still have the letter, James said, holding up the envelope. If you think this is too much, if you need me to slow down, I'll rip it up right now. I'll stay in the Guard and we'll figure out long distance with occasional visits. But Emma, if you're willing to try, if you're willing to let me come to Chicago and see if we can make this work, then I'm ready to take that leap. Emma looked at the envelope, at James's hopeful face, at Colonel Harrison's resigned but supportive expression. This was really happening. James was willing to change his entire life, not to follow her blindly, but to create space for them to explore what they had found together. When would you come to Chicago? She asked quietly. 3 weeks, James said. I'd need to work my notice period, get my affairs in order, find a temporary place to stay. I wouldn't presume to stay with you right away, but I'd be there close enough that we could see each other, spend real time together, not just stolen moments. And if it doesn't work out? Emma had to ask, had to voice the fear that still lingered. If we realize this was just a holiday romance, that the magic doesn't survive reality, then I'll have a good job in London to come back to, James said. And you'll have tried. We'll both have tried. Isn't that better than always wondering? Emma wiped her eyes, laughing despite her tears. Your uncle must think I'm such a mess. My uncle thinks you're the first person who's made me smile like this in years, Colonel Harrison said gruffly. And while I still think you're both crazy, I'd rather see my nephew happy and crazy than miserable and safe. Emma made her decision. She took the envelope from James's hand and, before she could second-guess herself, tore it in half. James's face fell for a moment, confusion clouding his features. You don't quit the Guard for me, Emma said firmly. You take the new job for you, because it's what you want, because it gives you room to grow. But James, you need to know something. I'm not a fairy tale princess. I'm messy and complicated. I overthink everything. I have student loans and a tiny apartment and a job at a bookstore that barely pays my bills. I'm not some magical solution to your life. I don't need a magical solution, James said, understanding dawning in his eyes. I need a real person. I need someone who challenges me, who makes me want to be better, who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being reckless. Then come to Chicago, Emma said, fresh tears falling. Come in 3 weeks. We'll take it slow, figure it out as we go. But James, I need you to promise me something. Promise me that every decision you make is for yourself first, for us second. I can't be with someone who sacrifices their dreams for me. That's not love. That's pressure. I promise, James said. And then he was kissing her, right there on Tower Bridge with tourists streaming past and Colonel Harrison clearing his throat awkwardly. When they finally broke apart, Colonel Harrison actually chuckled. Well, I suppose I should leave you two to your goodbyes. Jamie, you're still expected at barracks tomorrow morning. This romantic gesture doesn't excuse you from duty for the next 3 weeks. Yes, sir, James said, grinning. And Uncle Harold, thank you. For everything. The colonel nodded, then surprised Emma by extending his hand to her. Take care of him, Miss Collins. He's stubborn and idealistic, but he's got a good heart. I will. Emma promised, shaking his hand. And thank you for not standing in his way. After Colonel Harrison left, James and Emma walked across the bridge hand in hand. They had hours before Emma's flight, and they spent them wandering through London. No longer tourists, but two people building the foundation of something real. They had lunch at a small Italian restaurant, shared gelato in Leicester Square, and talked about practical things, where James would stay in Chicago, how often they could realistically see each other during his 3-week notice period, what they would tell their friends and family. Rachel is going to think I've lost my mind, Emma said, laughing. Flying home one day, and 3 weeks later, a British man shows up claiming we're dating. My mother is going to want to meet you immediately, James warned. She's already heard all about you from Uncle Harold. She's thrilled, actually. Keeps saying it's about time I did something spontaneous. As the afternoon wore on and the time for Emma's departure approached, the mood grew more somber. The 3 weeks that followed tested Emma and James in ways neither had anticipated. The first few days were easy, almost euphoric. They texted constantly, video chatted every evening, falling asleep with their phones propped up beside them so they could see each other even across the distance. Emma felt like she was floating through her days at the bookstore, distracted and giddy in a way that made her co-workers tease her mercilessly. But by the second week, reality began to intrude. Time zones became an enemy. When Emma was just getting home from work, exhausted and wanting to talk, James was already past midnight in London, his words becoming slower and more muddled with sleep. They tried to adjust, but there was no perfect time that worked for both of them consistently. Emma's anxiety, which had been quiet during their time together in London, began to resurface. In the middle of the night, she would wake up convinced that this was all a mistake, that she had built up something in her head that couldn't possibly exist in reality. She would scroll through their text messages, looking for reassurance, wondering if James's words were as enthusiastic as they had been the first few days, or if she was imagining a distance creeping in. James was dealing with his own challenges. Leaving the Queen's Guard, even for a better position, involved more bureaucracy than he had anticipated. There were exit interviews, paperwork, transitional duties. Some of his fellow guardsmen congratulated him, understanding his desire for change. Others questioned his judgment, suggesting that he was throwing away tradition and honor for a girl he barely knew. They don't understand, James told Emma during one particularly difficult video call. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. They see it as me abandoning my post. But Emma, I feel more alive making this choice than I ever did standing still. Are you sure? Emma asked, her insecurity showing. James, if this is too hard, if I'm causing you too much trouble with your colleagues, oh, you're not causing anything. James interrupted firmly. This is my choice. But I won't lie and say it's easy. Change never is. They had their first real argument on day 13. It started small, with Emma mentioning that she had gone out for drinks with coworkers, including a guy named Marcus, who had recently joined the bookstore staff. She mentioned it casually, not thinking anything of it, but James's response came sharper than usual. Who's Marcus? He asked, an edge to his voice that Emma had never heard before. Just a coworker, Emma said, confused by his tone. James, it was a group thing. Like 6 of us. You didn't mention him before. Because he's not important, Emma said, feeling defensive now. Are you seriously jealous right now? I'm not jealous, James said, but his face on the screen told a different story. I just find it interesting that you're going out with other men while I'm over here rearranging my entire life. Emma felt anger flash through her. Wow. Okay, first of all, I'm not going out with anyone. I went for drinks with coworkers, which is a normal thing people do. Second, I didn't ask you to rearrange your life. That was your choice. Don't put that on me. The silence that followed was heavy. James ran his hand through his hair. A gesture Emma had learned meant he was frustrated with himself. You're right. I'm sorry. That was unfair. I'm just tired and I miss you, and apparently I'm more insecure than I realized. I miss you too, Emma said, her anger deflating. But James, we can't do this. We can't start questioning each other every time one of us mentions another person. That's not trust. That's not what I want. I know, James agreed. I'm sorry, really, it won't happen again. But the argument left a residue, a small crack in the foundation they were building. They were both more careful in the following days, editing their words, avoiding topics that might cause friction. Emma didn't mention when Marcus invited her to lunch, even though she declined. James didn't tell Emma about the woman at his new job who had asked if he was single, even though he had immediately mentioned his girlfriend. Rachel noticed the change in Emma. They met for coffee on a Saturday, and Emma must have checked her phone 15 times in the first 20 minutes. Okay. Spill, Rachel said, reaching across the table to put her hand over Emma's phone. What's going on? You look stressed. It's nothing, Emma said. But Rachel's skeptical look made her continue. It's just hard. The distance, the waiting. We had our first fight last week, and since then everything feels weird. Like we're both walking on eggshells. That's normal, Rachel said gently. You two went from this intense romantic few days together to suddenly being apart. The adjustment is going to be rough. But you have to communicate. You can't start hiding things from each other because you're afraid of rocking the boat. What if he gets here and realizes it was a mistake? Emma blurted out, voicing her deepest fear. What if the magic was just the novelty, the romance of London, and real life kills it? Then you'll find out, Rachel said practically. But Emma, you can't protect yourself from hurt by pulling away now. If this is going to work, you both have to be all in even when it's messy. Emma knew Rachel was right. That night when she and James video chatted, she decided to be honest. We need to talk about the other day, she started. About the fight we had. James looked wary. Okay. I feel like we've been weird since then, Emma continued. Like we're both censoring ourselves, trying not to upset each other. And I hate it. I don't want that kind of relationship. Neither do I, James admitted. Emma, I was an idiot. I was jealous and tired, and I took it out on you. But you were right to call me on it. I don't want to be the kind of person who tries to control you or questions your every move. And I don't want to be the kind of person who hides things from you because I'm afraid of how you'll react, Emma said. So here's the truth. Marcus did ask me to lunch after that night out. I said no because I'm not interested in him that way, but also because I realized I hadn't told you about him, which felt dishonest. James was quiet for a moment. Thank you for telling me. And for what it's worth, a woman at my new workplace asked if I was single. I told her I was very much not single. But I didn't tell you about it because I didn't want to make you worry. We're both terrible at this, Emma said with a small laugh. Spectacularly terrible, James agreed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we learn together. Emma, I'm going to get jealous sometimes because I'm human and I'm far away from you. And you're probably going to have moments of doubt because you've been hurt before. But we can't let those moments define us. We call them out, we talk about them, and we move forward. Together, Emma said. Together, James confirmed. 1 week left, by the way. 7 more days and I'm on a plane. The final week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma cleaned her apartment obsessively, worried that James would find it too small or too messy. She bought new sheets, rearranged her bookshelf 5 times, and stress-baked so many cookies that she had to give most of them away to neighbors. James, meanwhile, was tying up every loose end in London. He had found a furnished month-to-month rental near Emma's neighborhood in Chicago. Nothing permanent, nothing that assumed too much, just a place where he could stay while they figured things out. His mother had visited his last weekend in London, bringing photo albums and embarrassing stories that James made her promise not to share with Emma. She must be very special, his mother had said, looking at him with knowing eyes. I haven't seen you this nervous since you were 16 and asked Sarah Mitchell to the school dance. She is special, Mum, James had replied. She's everything. The night before James's flight, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, alternating between excitement and terror. What if they had built this up too much in their heads? What if the chemistry they had in London didn't translate to Chicago? What if he took one look at her normal, everyday life and realized he had made a huge mistake? Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Can't sleep either. Too excited. Too nervous. Too everything. See you tomorrow, Emma. Finally, Emma smiled and typed back, tomorrow. I'll be the one at arrivals holding the embarrassing sign with your name on it. Please don't. Too late. Already made it. It has glitter. I'm getting back on the plane. No takebacks, Lancaster. You're stuck with me now. Emma's alarm went off at 6 in the morning, though she was already awake. James's flight was due to land at 1 in the afternoon, which meant she had 7 hours to fill with increasingly frantic preparation. She showered, changed outfits 4 times, redid her makeup twice, and paced her apartment until Rachel video called her at noon. Breathe, Rachel commanded. You look beautiful. He's going to love seeing you. Now get to the airport before you spiral completely. Emma arrived at O'Hare International Airport an hour early. She positioned herself at the arrivals area, watching families reunite and business travelers hurrying past. Every time the automatic doors opened and new passengers emerged, her heart leaped. And then, finally, she saw him. James pushing a cart with 2 large suitcases scanning the crowd. He looked different in person than he had on her phone screen for 3 weeks, more solid, more real. He was wearing jeans and a blue sweater, his hair slightly mussed from the long flight. And when his eyes found hers across the terminal, his entire face lit up. Emma didn't remember moving, but suddenly she was running. And then James was dropping the cart and catching her, lifting her off her. The first 2 weeks of James being in Chicago were harder than either of them had expected. Not bad exactly, but challenging in ways that tested the foundation of what they were building together. James's apartment, a small furnished studio in Emma's neighborhood, was functional but impersonal. He joked that it looked like a hotel room where someone had forgotten to add any personality. Emma helped him buy some basics, throw pillows and a coffee maker and a plant that he immediately worried he would kill through neglect. The adjustment wasn't just about the physical space. It was about learning each other in the mundane moments. Emma discovered that James was impossibly neat, the kind of person who made his bed with military precision every morning and washed dishes immediately after using them. James learned that Emma was chronically late to everything, that she left coffee cups around her apartment like she was marking territory, and that she talked to herself constantly when she was alone. "I'm not alone anymore, am I?" Emma said one evening when James gently pointed out that she had just narrated her entire process of making dinner out loud. "I don't mind," James said with a smile. "It's actually kind of adorable. Like getting a running commentary on the Emma show. They had to figure out practical things too. How much time should they spend together?" James didn't want to be clingy, to overwhelm Emma by demanding all her free time. Emma didn't want to seem distant, like she wasn't excited about him being there. They stumbled through it, overcorrecting in both directions until they finally found a rhythm. 3 nights a week they had dates, planned activities where they explored Chicago together. James fell in love with the architecture, spending hours staring up at skyscrapers, taking photos like a tourist. Emma showed him her favorite bookstore, the one where she worked, and introduced him to her co-workers. Marcus, the guy who had caused that first argument, shook James's hand and said, "Man, Emma talks about you constantly. It's actually kind of annoying." But he said it with a grin, and James relaxed. 2 nights a week they spent time with their own friends, maintaining their separate lives. Emma had her standing Thursday dinner with Rachel, and James started joining a pickup soccer league that one of his new colleagues had invited him to. It felt important to both of them that their relationship didn't consume their entire identities. The remaining 2 nights were spontaneous, sometimes together, sometimes apart, giving them space to breathe and miss each other a little. But the real test came a month into James being in Chicago. Emma woke up one morning with a text from her mother. "Your father is in the hospital. Heart problems. They're running tests. Can you come home to Wisconsin?" Emma called her mother immediately, panic rising in her chest. Her father had always seemed invincible, the kind of man who never got sick, who prided himself on his strength. The idea of him in a hospital bed was terrifying. "They think it's angina," her mother said, trying to sound calm but failing. "He's stable, but Emma, I'm scared. Can you come, even just for a few days?" "I'll be there today," Emma promised. "I'll leave as soon as I can pack a bag." After she hung up, Emma sat on her bed trying to process everything. She needed to call her boss, arrange time off, figure out how long she'd be gone. She reached for her phone to text Rachel, then hesitated. She should probably tell James first. When she called him, he answered on the first ring. "Good morning, beautiful. I was just thinking about her, Emma." "What's wrong?" She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. James listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said simply, "I'm coming with you." "What?" "No, James, you don't have to, I know I don't have to," James said firmly. "I want to. Emma, your father is in the hospital. You shouldn't drive all the way to Wisconsin alone, and you shouldn't face this alone. Let me be there for you. But you just started your new job. You can't just take time off already." "I'll figure it out," James said. "Give me an hour to make some calls. Pack your bag. I'll pick you up and we'll drive together." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was too much, too soon, that he shouldn't have to meet her parents under these circumstances. But the truth was, she desperately wanted him there. She didn't want to face this alone. True to his word, James arrived at her apartment exactly an hour later. He had somehow gotten 3 days off from work, packed a bag, and looked completely calm. "Ready?" he asked. The drive to Wisconsin took nearly 3 hours. Emma was quiet for most of it, her anxiety manifesting in fidgeting hands and repeatedly checking her phone for updates from her mother. James drove steadily, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her hand, providing comfort through his presence rather than empty platitudes. When they arrived at the hospital, Emma's mother was in the waiting room. She looked exhausted, her face drawn with worry. When she saw Emma, she stood and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "He's okay," she said immediately. "They're keeping him for observation, but the doctors think medication and lifestyle changes should help." "He's going to be okay, sweetheart," Emma sobbed with relief against her mother's shoulder. When she finally pulled back, her mother's gaze shifted to James, who had been standing a respectful distance away. "Mom, this is James," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "James Lancaster. He drove me up." Emma's mother studied James for a long moment. She was a practical woman, a high school teacher who didn't suffer fools and had very strong opinions about the kind of people her daughter should surround herself with. Emma held her breath. Then her mother extended her hand. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," she said. "She mentioned you in our last few phone calls. Said you were someone special." "She's the special one, Mrs. Collins," James replied, shaking her hand. "I'm just lucky she tolerates me." Emma's mother actually smiled. "Well, you can't visit him yet. They're running more tests. But there's a cafe downstairs. Why don't you two get some coffee, get Emma something to eat? She probably hasn't eaten all day." Her mother was right. Emma hadn't even thought about food. James guided her to the cafe, ordered her a sandwich and soup, and sat with her while she picked at her food, her appetite minimal but present. "Thank you," Emma said quietly, "for being here." "For dropping everything." "Emma, where else would I be?" James asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "This is what we do. We show up for each other, the big moments and the hard ones." Over the next 3 days, James proved exactly that. He stayed with Emma at a hotel near the hospital, drove her back and forth for visiting hours, and sat with her in waiting rooms without complaint. When Emma's father was finally cleared to go home with a strict regimen of medications and dietary changes, James helped Emma's mother set up a schedule for monitoring his condition. But the most significant moment came on the second day. Emma had gone to the hospital cafeteria to get coffee, and when she returned, she found James in her father's hospital room, the two of them deep in conversation. "So you're the British fellow who convinced my daughter to take a chance again," Emma's father was saying. His voice was weak, but there was amusement in it. "She told me about you. Said you were worth the risk." "I hope to prove her right, sir," James replied, "though I'd argue she's the one worth the risk. I just had the good sense to recognize it." Emma's father chuckled, then winced slightly. "Emma's always felt things deeply. Her mother and I used to worry it would get her hurt. And it did with that last boyfriend. But you seem different. You showed up. That means something." "It means everything," James said seriously. "Mr. Collins, I know this is early, and I know the circumstances aren't ideal, but I want you to know my intentions are serious. I didn't move across an ocean on a whim. I moved because Emma makes me want to be a better version of myself." Emma's father nodded slowly. "Just promise me something. If you ever stop feeling that way, if you ever realize this isn't what you want, you tell her honestly. Don't string her along. She deserves honesty." "I promise," James said. "You have my word." Emma, standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes, cleared her throat. Both men looked up, and James had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at being caught in such a sincere moment. "Don't stop on my account," Emma said, walking into the room. "This is the most interesting conversation I've heard all day." Her father smiled. "I like him, Emma. He'll do." Coming from her father, those 3 words were practically a declaration of approval. Emma felt something settle in her chest, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. On the drive back to Chicago, Emma was notably more relaxed than she had been on the way up. Her father was going to be okay. James had passed the parent test with flying colors. Everything felt possible again. "That was intense," James said as they crossed back into Illinois, "meeting your parents under those circumstances." "You were perfect," Emma said. "My dad is a tough critic. The fact that he said you'll do means he really likes you." "What about your mother?" James asked. I couldn't quite read her. My mother called me last night when you were in the shower at the hotel, Emma admitted. She said, and I quote, "That boy looks at you like you hung the moon." Don't let this one get away, James grinned. Smart woman, your mother. As they drove, Emma found herself thinking about the past month, about all the small and large ways James had integrated himself into her life. He wasn't perfect. He sometimes got too